Evening and welcome to another video in the Artful Coder series. Tonight we're going to cover clean architecture, application layer, middleware and exceptions. Now I wanted to cover this before we move on to the web API because it's something that'll come in really handy. And what exactly is a middleware? Well, a middleware is code or a program that sits between the request or the web API and your application layer. What it does is it checks for things like errors, and then it gives you a nice JSON formatted object back so you can just check if it's successful or if it's not, etc. And they're very handy because you may not just want a massive stack trace or trace route return to the app. You may want a nice friendly message. And that is what we're going to cover today, is those kind of like friendly messages that will make your app more and your web API more meaningful in its returns when an error has occurred. So let's just have a recap. So in our previous video we created a use case called add car. Now for simplicity's sake, and so it covers the aspects, we're just going to cover a validation function. Now there's plenty of ways to do this, or you can use validation behaviors, but there's a way I've come up with that's quite good. So what we're going to do is just going to create an exception. Here, create a new folder, call this add new folder, and call this exceptions. And let's just call this add a new item in here. You could subcategorize it into, yes, do that. So let's have a look at bars. Okay, and then add a new item, new class rather, and this is going to be called missing input validation exception. Always end them with exceptions to do that. And it creates our class, so public, and it needs to extend the exception name, the exception object. So if we just say public missing input validation exception, and this is going to take string message, and it's going to be base message. There you go, and that's all you need to do at this stage, and we'll show you how that comes into play. So just create a very first exception. It's just simple class, and it passes the message back up to base. So the next thing we want to do is actually now want to put some validation in this. So we want to ensure that certain information is filled in before we try and add it to the database. So what I want you to do is create a new function down here and always comment the code where you can. Obviously haven't done this before, but method below added, and it will show in all your DevOps. So private, and it's going to be a type of ball. Now the reason it's type ball because it's a true or false, so it's going to handle the error message. So what we're going to do is we're going to say valid at input. And what we're going to pass in here, we don't need a cancellation tag, we're just going to pass that down to there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to put var valid. So we're going to put a valid in there and just return. I always like to scaffold the tops and the bottoms initially. And we're going to say try because we're going to be throwing exceptions if they don't exist. And we're going to do hatch. So we're going to have the less generic. So missing input validation exception EX. So what is that going to do? Not a lot at the moment, but we're just going to throw it back up. Just so we do. And you can by all means do how you want to do. So we want to do, to keep this simple, we're not going to go too lot seem to do different validations. So what we're going to say is we'll just do some assignments. So make equals request.make. And what we're going to do here is, this is very clever. So you say if make could be null dot trim equals, then we're going to say throw new missing input value exception. And what we're going to say here is going to say sorry, but make is required. And yes, you could argue that there must be a value, but I just think this displays a nicer message to the user. So we're throwing our exception in. We're just going to do one at this stage, but you could change them. And we're going to say valid equals true. There you go. So we now have a simple, very simplistic validation function. And what we're going to say here is if it's valid, then we're going to do the whole lot of this. And we're just going to do, and we're going to paste this in here because, and then you'll need to catch it in there. So I'm going to paste that in there. There you go. So the flow of events is it takes a request object, make up here gets passed into here, through here, down to our validation input. And if the make is blank, we're going to throw a missing input validation exception. Okay, so what we're going to do is we then want to catch this up here. So just repeat this because we're going to pass it, throw it back up the chain. What we're going to do here is we just go through that. I don't think it kind of needs that there. So we'll just leave that for a minute. There you go. So what you've got is you've now got your first use case with a bit of validation input, and this will be returned. So how does our middleware come into play? Well, what it's going to do is say, try and add a car. It's then going to check the next request using a delegate, and then it's going to pass back Json information if we have an exception and pass back the message. So there's a couple of things you need to do to have a middleware, and they can be very sophisticated or very simple depending on what you want to do and your particular needs, because each project is different. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new folder in here called middleware. I don't know how to say, we'll call it middleware or that. And what you're going to need to do next is it needs to implement in the middleware namespace. So we're going to add a new class in here, and this is going to be called exception handling, and it has to end with middleware, all lowercase. Has to end like that. If I can talk properly, I do apologise. .cs. So, okay, so we've got our namespace here, and it has to be a public sealed class. So what that means that you can't implement it. What I mean by it is you can't change it. Once you set up, it can't be changed. So private, we're going to create read-only. We're going to create read-only a logger. So if you want to iLogger support, you can do so. Logger. And all we're going to point it to is exception handling middleware. And then you want your constructor, which you can keep on one line, but you can go over many. So it's going to be called exception handling middleware. And it's going to take as an iLogger there and do that. That's one way, but the other way you can do it is do it as an arrow function. So you could say that and do that. Both perfectly acceptable, so it's entirely up to you what you want to do. So I just prefer to have this because then you know is a bit clearer to me. So, right, okay, I'm going to put that in there. That's it. So we've created a constructor of that. Now, when you're doing middleware, it invokes a task. So the other thing we need to do as well, which I've missed off, is we want middleware. So we're going to need to bring something in, and that is a couple of using. So using system dot, not system, but Microsoft dot. Oh, we don't have that in here. So we need to add a reference. So we need to go to NuGet Package Manager, and we need to add in that in. So let's go to Packages. We don't have that in there, so let's do NuGet Package Manager. And let's have a look, it loads up. And it's Microsoft ASP.NET Core HTTP. So that's the one you want. And that will install other bits that we need for this process as well. Now, let's see what happens if we do that. Let's see what happens. We'll try and roll it back. Apply. Accept. Okay, so it's still, oh, I know why. If I had a brain, so we've imported that, so let's just drop that there. And let's have a look at that. So if you're ever unsure, have a look. You can use Microsoft Docs. If you're unsure where it lives, you can use Microsoft Docs to find out where something comes from. So where has it come from exactly? So we've got that one up there. Have we not just said using Microsoft HTTP? There you go. So we're going to get an error now because we're not calling this function down here, which is this here. So let's create that function now. So it's going to be a public asynchronous of type just task. It's not going to have a return value. And it's invoke async, and it's HTTP context, and we're also going to have request delegate as next, or the next thing. And I'll put there, and all it's going to simply do is a try catch. So it processes that. So the first thing we're going to do is await next in there and context, because we're checking our context. And then the magic where we actually handle this is catch in there. So we effectively throw we kind of throw another error within a catch sort of thing. We throw it back up. That's what you do when you throw. So let's just do logger, and let's log an error. So this is if you want to log it, but you may have your own logger support, and do ex.message, and that's just going to log it up. And the last thing we do is wait. And what do we want here? Because we've technically already called we haven't got a function set up, so we need to create one. So we'll just leave that there for a second, and this is going to be a private static async task. So it's just task, it's non-void, it's a void rather, and this is going to be handle invoke exception async. And what we're going to pass into this is the HTTP context and the exception itself. So let's just put context and do exception. There you go. So what we're going to do is we're now going to invoke this function. And what it's going to do is it's going to just copy that over there. Context is as the context up there. And we'll pass in the HTTP context. The reason we're using that because we're going to be writing to, where is it getting that from? EX, that's why. Okay. So we're going to be writing to the response stream. And that's what we're going to be building up. So what do we need from a response message? Well, we need the title. So that is a nice display title you could put on your message outside. The status code, now this is things like if it's success in your Blazor, that is a status 200, but if it's anything else, then it's a status for 400 for bad requests or not found or whatever you want to do. So we need a couple of sub methods in here. So we create a new method called private static int, and we say get status code. And all we're going to pass in here is exception, ex. And that's going to do us, this is going to use an arrow function. We use an arrow function for this, which you can do either way you want to because you just return, you'd have an int and return it. So we're going to do demonstrate arrow functions back up here, do equals that. And what we're going to do is we're going to switch on ex switch, and it's going to switch on here. So what are we switching on? Well, this is a good one because we're switching on the type of exception. So we're going to say here, so the first thing we need to do is go into here to our exceptions, copy that. A good way to add them is assembly is to copy something. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, so if this error has occurred, what are we going to return? So if we do that, it's going to complain because it's not there. So that's absolutely fine at all. So just say, copy that, hasn't done it, sometimes it does. And we're just going to say using, there you go. So we've got that, and you then use an arrow function to say status codes dot status. So you can see here there's a whole host of status codes you can use. Predominantly you use 400 and 200. So you can see from if we go to 200, okay. So we're going to use bad request. And what do we want to do if there is no, if it's some other exception? Well, we want to throw a 500 error. So status codes dot status. I'll go find 500 on here. There you go, internal server. And that is all we need to do for that. So now we're going to go back up here and we're going to start to build up our status code. So we're saying status codes and say equals get status code, or we do pass the exception in. And now we're going to create a response object. So this is what we want to return as JSON. So we're going to do var, let's call this response JSON. And it's just a type of new, it's a self object. So we're just going to do that. And what we want is we want a title. So we're right. You could have a function with this as well. So let's do that. Let's create a function for the title. So we'll create private, let's call this get exception status code. I'm sorry for having it there. So, okay, exception, we know it's exception, but I'd rather just keep it like that. So, let's go to static string get exceptions. You may have other functions in here. title. And again, you just pass the exception in here, so EX, pass it in there, we use another arrow function, and the switch this time is going to be exception, switch, not that, hang on, sorry, EX, switch, do that, and again, we're just going to say here, just going to copy that into there, and we use an arrow function. This could be stored in your exceptions, we may play about that later. I'm just going to say error occurred. There you go. We may have a default one as well, like server error or something, so we know what it is. We'll just chain them down, and we'll do that, and do equals that, and do server error. Okay, so title is going to be equal to, let's keep it consistent. I know some people like to do lowercase, but I am a sod for title case or camel case, what it's called. So get exception title, pass an exception, and then what we want is a status code equals status code. Yes, it may be that. So status code, and what is the detail of the error? And that is simply equal to exception dot message. And you could have all sorts of things down there, but yeah, so you could, not that there, so you could, for example, have another, but just play about with your code to get an idea. So the last thing we need to do to wire this up so it will handle it is we need to write it back to the calling client via the web API. So this won't come in handy yet, but it will in the future. So we want to set text dot response, and we want to set the content type. There you go, it's already suggested it. And the next one we want to do is we want to say dot response. There you go. So we'll return it as part of here, which you don't have to do. You could simply check the actual header code that comes back. And then the very last thing is we want to await, because it's async, context dot response dot write async Json no, and we're going to build a Json. Let's see if it'll do it. Serializer. Here we go. It's going to bring it in. So it's our new namespace, and serialize response. Oh, it's response Json. There you go. So that is your middleware built. And yes, you could pass in your DB context and log to the database. Again, this is just illustrating the context of it. We might get a null there, or there might be something that's not like him. We're just going to keep it simple. So, and the last thing you need to do to get it to work, so it keys in, is we need to go back up to our configure services, and we need to add it in so it knows how to process it. So we do ks 29.02.2024 line below added, and we'll give this as a transient, but we don't want that, and it is exception handling middleware, and that is all we need to do. There you go. So that in essence is what I want to cover in this video. So when we start building the web API up, we'll have these nice fantastic messages returned to the browser that are a bit better than a massive load of errors like you get in a stack trace. It just simplifies it. Yes, you could go one step further and have a base exception, and in here, your middleware, you could actually pull the status code from the exception, say, and the message will come in a title as well. You could expand that, but just to demonstrate this middleware, I've kept it quite simplistic. And it just shows what error codes it's going to send back, what status codes, and also the title. Yes, you could just put it up here, hard-coded error code, but there might be other things like that. You could change this, for example, to validation error. There you go, and then you can have another one that's different. So you can see now that within our add car, we've got some validation that's going to throw an exception if we don't have certain information, and it just throws it back up. Yes, you could log it in here. The idea is you could log all your exceptions, but just for simplicity, we'll keep it as it is. But I will show you how you can add a logger interface in here just so that you have that logger that will log to a database. But yeah, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and please keep tuned for more exciting videos when next we'll be on to building the web API there using, and then have a Blazor front end, and the acid test will, can we add a car to the database using what we've built. Okay, so again, thank you so much for watching.